The photograph sat in the archives of the Lancaster Historical Society for nearly 8 decades. Unremarkable at first glance. Black and white, slightly faded at the edges, it showed a group of children standing in neat rows outside what appeared to be a brick orphanage. Their faces, some solemn, some with half smiles, stared out from 1941, a frozen moment just months before Pearl Harbor would pull America into the second Great War of the century. April 2019. Dr. Eleanor Whitman adjusted her glasses as she carefully removed the photograph from its protective sleeve. As the Society's new head archivist, she had committed to digitizing their extensive collection of wartime photographs, a project that had been postponed for years due to budget constraints. A recent grant had finally made it possible, and Eleanor found herself alone in the basement archives, surrounded by boxes of forgotten memories. Group photo, St. Agnes Children's Home, November 1941, read the faded handwriting on the back. Nothing particularly special about it, one of hundreds of similar institutional photographs from that era. Yet something about this image made Eleanor pause. Perhaps it was the expression on one boy's face in the back row, or the way the children seemed to lean ever so slightly away from the center of the frame. Whatever it was, something felt off. "Just get through this box before lunch," she muttered to herself, placing the photograph on the scanner. Her computer screen illuminated with the high-resolution scan, 12,000 dpi, capturing details invisible to the naked eye. Eleanor was about to file it in the digital archive when curiosity got the better of her. She zoomed in. What she saw made her breath catch. In the shadowed corner of the orphanage building, partially obscured by a tree branch, was a face, watching the children from a window. Not a child's face, but something else entirely, something that shouldn't have been there. "This can't be right," Eleanor whispered, leaning closer to her screen. She zoomed in further, adjusting the contrast. The face became clearer, distinct, deliberate, and horrifyingly out of place. It would take months of investigation before Eleanor understood what she was seeing. It would take years before the world would believe her. "You need to see this, Marcus." Eleanor's voice echoed through the quiet museum offices 3 weeks later. She had barely slept since discovering the photograph, spending nights researching the history of St. Agnes and its occupants. Marcus Chen, the Society's photo restoration specialist, rolled his chair over to Eleanor's desk. "What am I looking at?" he asked, squinting at her screen. "November 1941, St. Agnes Children's Home. 27 orphans and 3 staff members in the front. But look at the window on the upper right." Marcus leaned forward, then jerked back slightly. "Is that?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "And I need you to confirm it's not a flaw in the photograph or some trick of light." Over the next several days, Marcus applied every authentication technique available to the digitized image. Spectral analysis, grain pattern examination, chemical composition tests on the original. All confirmed what Eleanor had suspected. The photograph had not been tampered with. Whatever was in that window had been there when the picture was taken in 1941. "It's authentic," Marcus finally declared, laying a folder of technical reports on Eleanor's desk. "But that doesn't explain what we're looking at." Eleanor nodded slowly, her historian's mind already formulating the next steps. "We need to identify these children, find anyone still alive who might have been there. After 80 years, that's a long shot." "Maybe," Eleanor said, studying the faces of the children in the photograph. "But look at them, Marcus. Something terrible happened at St. Agnes, and I think this photo might be the only evidence left." St. Agnes Children's Home had closed in 1963, its records scattered between county archives, church repositories, and private collections. Eleanor spent months piecing together its history, tracing what had happened to the children in the photograph. What emerged was a disturbing pattern. Of the 27 children pictured, she could only find records for 19. 8 seemed to have vanished entirely from official documentation after 1942. No school records, no military service, no marriage certificates. Nothing. "It's like they disappeared," Eleanor explained to her department head, Dr. Richard Halloway, 6 months into her investigation, and the timing coincides with something else I found. She pulled out a brittle newspaper clipping from February 1942. "Tragic fire at local orphanage, 3 children perish." The article described a nighttime fire at St. Agnes that had been attributed to faulty wiring. 3 deaths, Dr. Halloway noted, But you said 8 children are unaccounted for. Exactly, Eleanor replied, and here's where it gets strange. The fire was in the east wing, specifically beneath the room with that window. She pointed to her enlarged photograph, to the face watching from behind the glass. Dr. Holloway studied the image, his expression shifting from skepticism to unease. What do you think we're looking at, Eleanor? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I found something else. She pulled out another document, a staff list from St. Agnes. The director at the time was Dr. Frederick Winters. He was a psychiatrist who previously worked at Danvers State Hospital. The asylum? Yes, and his specialty was treating children with... She hesitated. What they called abnormal tendencies back then. Dr. Holloway leaned back in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. You're suggesting something experimental was happening at St. Agnes. I'm not suggesting anything yet, Eleanor said carefully. But I need to keep looking. The breakthrough came in the form of a letter, one that had been misplaced in the archives of a nearby county's historical society. It was written by a nurse who had worked at St. Agnes in the early 1940s, addressed to her sister, April 3rd, 1942. Dearest Margaret, I cannot continue my employment at St. Agnes. What Dr. Winters is doing to those children in the East Wing is unconscionable. They are kept separate from the others, and the screaming at night. I've been told they are receiving necessary treatments, but I've seen the equipment he brings in. This is not medical care. 3 children have already died under suspicious circumstances, though the official report calls it an accident. The others in his program appear drugged, unresponsive. I fear what will happen to them. I've tried reporting my concerns, but Dr. Winters has connections with the hospital board and local officials. No one will listen. I'm leaving at the end of the week. I cannot be part of this any longer. Your loving sister, Catherine. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read the letter. This was the first concrete evidence supporting her growing suspicion that something sinister had occurred at St. Agnes, something deliberately covered up. But the letter didn't explain the face in the window. For that, Eleanor needed a witness. Martha Pearson was 91 years old, living in a retirement community just outside of Lancaster. She had been 12 when the photograph was taken, one of the older girls at St. Agnes, standing in the front row with a ribbon in her hair. Finding her had taken Eleanor nearly a year of painstaking research, tracking name changes through marriage records and relocations through property documents. Mrs. Pearson, Eleanor said gently, sitting beside the elderly woman's armchair, thank you for agreeing to see me. Martha's eyes were sharp, despite her age, her hands folded neatly in her lap. You said on the phone this was about St. Agnes. No one has asked me about that place in decades. Yes, Eleanor confirmed, opening her laptop. I found a photograph from November 1941. You're in it. Martha leaned forward as Eleanor turned the screen toward her. A small gasp escaped her lips. That's me, she whispered, pointing to the girl with the ribbon. Her finger moved across the screen, identifying others. Sarah, Thomas, little Rebecca. Her hand trembled slightly. Poor children. Mrs. Pearson, Eleanor said carefully, I noticed something unusual in this photograph. She zoomed in on the window in the east wing. The elderly woman's reaction was immediate and visceral. She recoiled, her hand flying to her throat. You can see it, she whispered. After all these years, you can see it. A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. See what, Mrs. Pearson? What am I looking at? Martha's eyes filled with tears. We called it the Shadow Doctor. It wasn't human. Not entirely. Doctor. Winters brought it with him when he came to St. Agnes. Eleanor tried to keep her expression neutral, though her heart was racing. What do you mean, not entirely human? Dr. Winters had theories about the mind, Martha explained, her voice steadying as she slipped into memories. About how to fix what he called broken children. Those of us who were considered normal lived in the main dormitories, but some children, the ones who were different, who had fits or heard voices or didn't speak, they were taken to the East Wing. She pointed to the window again. That's where it lived. The thing that helped Dr. Winters with his work. What kind of work, Mrs. Pearson? Martha looked away, staring out her own window at the garden beyond. They screamed at night. The children in the East Wing. We were told not to listen, that they were being helped. But after the fire... Her voice faltered. The fire in February 1942? Eleanor prompted gently. Martha nodded. They said 3 children died, but it was more. I counted the faces afterward. 8 were gone. And after the fire, the shadow doctor disappeared too. Eleanor carefully pulled out printouts of the 8 children she couldn't trace after 1942. Were these the ones, Mrs. Pearson? The elderly woman studied the images, nodding slowly. Yes, these are the ones he took to the East Wing, all of them special in some way. Daniel could multiply large numbers in his head. Rebecca remembered everything she ever read. Joseph? She paused, touching one boy's face gently. Joseph could sometimes tell you what you were thinking. And you believe they died in the fire? Martha's eyes met Eleanor's, suddenly clear and intense. No, Dr. Whitman, I don't believe they died at all. I believe Dr. Winters took them away, he and his shadow doctor. The fire was just to explain why they were gone. Eleanor left Martha Pearson's home with more questions than answers. The woman's story seemed fantastical. A creature helping with experimental treatments, children with unusual abilities. It would be easy to dismiss her account as the confused memories of an elderly woman or the imaginings of a child who had witnessed something traumatic, but the face in the window remained unexplained, and Eleanor couldn't ignore the gap in the records. 8 children who had simply vanished. Her investigation led her next to military archives. Dr. Frederick Winters had died in 1972, but his career after St. Agnes showed a curious pattern. From 1943 onward, he had worked on classified government projects, his published academic work ceasing entirely. The only official photograph Eleanor could find showed him receiving a commendation from a military official in 1955, the details of which remained redacted. Eleanor's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While researching Dr. Winters' military connections, she discovered a declassified document from 1953 referencing Project Nightingale, a study investigating exceptional cognitive abilities in juvenile subjects. The document made no direct reference to St. Agnes, but the timing was suspicious. Project Nightingale had begun in 1942, shortly after the orphanage fire. They didn't die in that fire, Eleanor murmured to herself, staring at her office wall where she had pinned photographs of the 8 missing children. They were taken. But the question remained, what was the face in the window, and how did it connect to the missing children? A knock at her office door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus stood in the doorway, looking troubled. "I've been running additional analyses on the photograph," he said, placing a folder on her desk. "I tried a new spectral separation technique to bring out details in the shadowed areas." Eleanor opened the folder. Inside was an enhanced version of the face in the window, now much clearer than before. She gasped. The face was humanoid but wrong. The proportions slightly off, the eyes too large and oddly spaced, the skin texture unnatural. Most disturbing was the expression. Not menacing, but clinical, observational, like a scientist watching specimens. "What am I looking at, Marcus?" she whispered. He shook his head. "I don't know. But it's not a photographic anomaly or trick of light. Whatever this is, it was physically present when the picture was taken." Eleanor sat back in her chair, her mind racing. Martha Pearson's words echoed in her memory. The shadow doctor. It wasn't human. Not entirely. "I need to find more witnesses," she decided. Over the next 6 months, Eleanor tracked down 3 more former residents of St. Agnes who had been children when the photograph was taken. 2 refused to speak about their experiences. The third, James Holloway, now 90 and living in a veterans' home in Virginia, agreed to meet. "I remember that day," he said, his voice gravelly with age as he studied the photograph Eleanor had brought. "November 12th, 1941. It was cold. Sister Agnes made us wear our Sunday clothes." "Do you remember anything unusual about the east wing of the building?" Eleanor asked carefully. James stiffened, his rheumy eyes suddenly sharp with alarm. "Why are you asking about that?" "I found something in this photograph," Eleanor explained, showing him the enhanced image of the face in the window. James stared at it, his hands beginning to tremble so violently that Eleanor reached out to steady them. "You weren't supposed to see that," he whispered. "No one was." "What is it, Mr. Holloway?" He looked around the room, as if checking for eavesdroppers, before leaning closer. "Dr. Winters called it his associate. It came at night, usually. We only caught glimpses, but it helped him with his work on the special children." "What kind of work?" James closed his eyes. "Tests. endless tests. They were trying to understand why some of us could do things others couldn't. Us, Eleanor asked, noting his choice of words. James met her gaze. I was one of them originally. I could sense things, know when something bad was about to happen. Dr. Winters was very interested in that. He tapped the photograph. 2 days after this picture, I was scheduled to be moved to the East Wing. But I got sick, scarlet fever. By the time I recovered, everything had changed. The fire had happened. The special children were gone. And the thing in the window? Gone too. But Dr. Winters stayed until 1943. He was different after that, excited, said he was being called to serve his country. Eleanor hesitated before asking her next question. Mr. Holloway, do you believe the children died in that fire? James studied her for a long moment. No, Dr. Whitman. I believe they were taken somewhere else. Somewhere they could be studied more thoroughly. By whom? The military. Perhaps, or perhaps by something else entirely. He tapped the window in the photograph again. It's kind. Back in Lancaster, Eleanor found herself at a crossroads. Her investigation had uncovered evidence of unethical experimentation, possible kidnapping, and government involvement in the disappearance of 8 children. But James Holloway's suggestion that the face in the window was something inhuman, possibly extraterrestrial, threatened to undermine the credibility of her entire investigation. I need to focus on facts, she told Marcus during their weekly meeting. We have 8 missing children. We have a documented connection between Dr. Winters and classified military research. We have multiple witnesses describing unethical experiments at St. Agnes. And we have that, Marcus said, pointing to the enhanced image of the face, which now hung on Eleanor's wall, which doesn't fit any factual framework we have. Eleanor was about to respond when her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar government number. Dr. Whitman, said a formal voice when she answered. This is Agent Thomas Reed with the Department of Defense. We understand you've been investigating the history of St. Agnes Children's Home, specifically events from 1941-1942. Eleanor's blood ran cold. That's correct. We'd like to speak with you about your findings. Would tomorrow at 10 a.m. be convenient? We can come to your office. Before she could formulate a response, the agent added, This isn't a request we make lightly, Dr. Whitman. It concerns matters of historical national security. After hanging up, Eleanor turned to Marcus, her face pale. How did they know I haven't published anything yet? Marcus looked equally troubled. What are you going to do? Eleanor stared at the photographs on her wall, the children's faces, Dr. Winters receiving his commendation, the thing in the window. I'm going to make copies of everything, she decided, and I'm going to find out who these children were. Eleanor worked through the night, creating digital backups of all her research and sending encrypted copies to her personal email. By morning, she had compiled comprehensive profiles of each missing child, documenting their backgrounds and the unusual abilities mentioned by Martha and James. Daniel Weber, mathematical prodigy. Rebecca Goldstein, eidetic memory. Joseph Chen, possible telepathic sensitivity. Samuel Johnson, precognitive dreams. Elizabeth Petrovich, synesthesia. Michael O'Connor, telekinetic incidents. David Abrams, extreme empathic sensitivity. Sarah Miller, spontaneous language acquisition. At precisely 10 a.m., Agent Reed arrived with a colleague. Both wore nondescript suits and carried slim briefcases. They declined coffee and sat stiffly in the chairs Eleanor offered. Dr. Whitman, Agent Reed began, we understand you've uncovered a photograph from St. Agnes Children's Home containing an anomalous image. Eleanor kept her expression neutral. Yes, a face in one of the windows. We'd like to see it. She pulled out the original photograph and its enhanced version. The agent studied them silently, exchanging a glance Eleanor couldn't interpret. You've done commendable historical research, Reed said finally. But we need to inform you that this photograph and the events surrounding it fall under national security protocols established in the 1940s. Because of Project Nightingale? Eleanor asked, watching their reaction carefully. Agent Reed's colleague stiffened slightly, a tell Eleanor didn't miss. We're not at liberty to discuss classified projects, Reed replied smoothly. But we can tell you that your investigation has touched on sensitive historical matters that remain classified. 8 children disappeared, Eleanor said firmly. Their families were told they died in a fire, but there's evidence suggesting they were taken for government experimentation. The public has a right to know the truth after 80 years, Dr. Whitman, Reed leaned forward. What would you say if I told you those 8 children didn't die? That they went on to live full, productive lives under new identities, contributing to scientific advancements that helped America win the Cold War? Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. I'd want proof, and I'd want to know why the deception was necessary. Reed's colleague opened his briefcase and removed a folder. This is all we can share at this time. It's been declassified specifically for you, with the understanding that certain details remain confidential. The folder contained 8 files, 1 for each missing child. Each included a photograph from the 1960s of an adult who bore a striking resemblance to one of the orphans, along with heavily redacted information about their work on classified projects. No full names were provided, only initials. They were recruited, Reed explained, for a special program utilizing their unique cognitive abilities. The fire was staged to facilitate their transition. Their families were compensated discreetly. Most of them were orphans, Eleanor pointed out. They had no families to compensate. Foster families, then guardians. The point is, Dr. Whitman, these children weren't victims. They were given opportunities far beyond what St. Agnes could offer. Eleanor studied the files, her historian's mind racing. The narrative made a certain kind of sense. A wartime government recruiting gifted children for secret research wasn't implausible, but it didn't explain everything. And this, she asked, tapping the enhanced image of the face in the window. What was Dr. Winter's associate? The agents exchanged another glance. We can't comment on that aspect of your findings, Reed said carefully. But I can tell you that certain scientific advancements of the 1940s were ahead of their time. You're asking me to drop my investigation. We're asking you to be judicious about what you publish. These 8 individuals, the children in your photograph, went on to do important work. Work that saved lives. Their privacy, even posthumously, deserves respect. After the agents left, taking the folder of files with them but leaving Eleanor with her original research, she sat in silence, processing the encounter. They're hiding something, she told Marcus later. The story about recruiting the children might be partially true, but it doesn't explain the face in the window or why 2 witnesses described it as inhuman. What will you do now? Marcus asked. Eleanor considered her options. I'm going to focus on finding descendants. If these 8 children really lived into adulthood, they might have had families, children, grandchildren who deserve to know their history. The search for descendants led Eleanor down an unexpected path. Using the initials and approximate ages from the government files, combined with her own research, she identified potential matches for 6 of the 8 missing children. Public records suggested 4 had indeed married and had children of their own. One name stood out, Dr. Eliza Petrov, a neurologist at Johns Hopkins, who had died in 2012. Her birth year aligned with what Elizabeth Petrovich's would have been, and her groundbreaking work on synesthesia and perception mirrored the abilities Martha had described in the young girl. Eleanor found Dr. Petrov's daughter, Catherine, teaching at Columbia University. I'm researching the history of St. Agnes Children's Home, Eleanor explained over coffee in Catherine's office. I believe your mother may have been a resident there in the early 1940s. Catherine frowned. That's not possible. My mother grew up in Chicago. Her parents were Russian immigrants. May I ask when she was born? April 15, 1933. The date matched Eleanor's records for Elizabeth Petrovich. Did your mother ever mention having unusual perceptual experiences? Seeing colors when hearing sounds, perhaps? Catherine's expression shifted from skepticism to surprise. How did you know that? It wasn't something she discussed publicly until late in her career. Eleanor carefully placed the orphanage photograph on the desk. This was taken in November 1941. The girl in the second row, 3rd from the left, her name was Elizabeth Petrovich. She would have been 8 years old. Catherine studied the image, her hand trembling slightly. This looks like my mother's childhood photos. But it can't be. She never mentioned an orphanage. There's more, Eleanor said gently. Explaining her investigation, the missing children and the government files, suggesting they had been recruited for a special program. Catherine listened in silence, her academic composure gradually giving way to disbelief, then anger. "You're suggesting my mother's entire history was fabricated, that she was taken from an orphanage for some secret government project." "I believe she may have been given a new identity," Eleanor clarified, "and that the abilities that made her a renowned neurologist were first noticed at St. Agnes by this Dr. Winters and his—" Catherine hesitated. "His associate." Eleanor nodded, choosing her next words carefully. "Two witnesses described seeing something unusual at St. Agnes, something they believed was working with Dr. Winters on studying children with special abilities." "This is impossible," Catherine whispered, though her eyes kept returning to the photograph. "My mother would have said something, would she? If she was 8 years old when taken, if she was given a new life, new parents, a new story, would she have remembered, or would she have been convinced that the orphanage was just a bad dream?" Catherine was silent for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to a filing cabinet. "After my mother died, I found a box of her personal papers, things she never published or shared." She removed a folder and placed it on the desk. Including these drawings, inside were childish sketches dated 1942-1943. Most depicted laboratory settings, medical equipment, and tests being performed on children. But one drawing made Eleanor's breath catch. A tall, thin figure with disproportionate features observing from a doorway. It matched the face in the window. Beneath it, in a child's handwriting, "The doctor's friend watches us learn."